As he always did before he entered the second-hand charity shop, he waited outside and only went in when there were no other customers. It was his regular, St. Agatha's, the place he went to buy the women's clothing he was addicted to wearing. Despite buying women's clothes and dressing up in them was all very legal, as long as he had been cross-dressing he had always felt it was not completely right, was often ashamed about what he did. He only did it at home, and always alone. His wife of 3 months had walked out when he told her liked to dress in women's clothes. She had told him a lot more then, that she disapproved of his filthy habit, his vile perversion, that she had no intention of living with man who thinks he's a woman, and that perhaps he should head into town, find a gay bar and get some. Odd language coming from a so-called Christian woman who let him know in no uncertain terms that homosexuality was a sin and he was on his way to hell. He knew he should have told her before the marriage. He chickened out believing she would accept him as he was, love would conquer all, etc., etc. Now she was in their home and he lived in a filthy basement flat. He did not find a gay bar in town and did not look for sex with a man. He had never thought or wanted that, he just liked cross-dressing. He finally made his way into the store and the old-fashioned bell above the door alerted Mrs. Robinson that someone had entered. "Hello, Jimmy. I have not seen you in here for a while." "Hi, Mrs. Robinson," Jimmy said to the older lady behind the counter. "I have been trying to give this tranny shopping up." "That will never happen," came the reply with a wide friendly smile. Jimmy thought, why could I not have had a wife like Mrs. Robinson? Like all crossdresser stories, he believed that most would be similar to his, beginning in his very young years with his mother dressing him up in his sister's clothes, all in front of his sister, who, in their time growing up at home, constantly teased him about how pretty he had looked. The seeds were there, and he more than once sneaked into her room and tried on her panties, and to his shame his mother's too. Mom and Carol know he did it and saved their accusations for when Dad was there, usually at the table when they were eating, and he had nowhere to hide. Jimmy was sure the reason his mother did it was to get at his dad, who was in the habit of staying out drinking late, left her short of money too often, and he was sure his father was regularly unfaithful to her. His sister Carol just seemed to enjoy his humiliation. "Why me?" he used to think. "Why can't I be normal?" His later teen years were in his opinion normal. He found he was attracted to girls and had numerous girlfriends. Then he met Frida. They went out together for almost 5 years before he was allowed to ask her to marry him. She had always insisted that they would not marry until they could afford their own property. They both worked hard. He worked 2 jobs, made sacrifices, saved, and finally managed to put together the deposit on a tiny property, and they were on the ladder. But it was still too early for kids, according to Frida. He had just about forgotten, but not quite, about his youthful desire to dress up, but in their tiny home everywhere he looked all he saw was Frida's clothes. She put nothing away. There was a permanent clothesline in the bathroom, always full of panties, bras, nighties, and pantyhose. That was what got him. It was too much. He began trying on her underwear. But he did not want it to become an ugly secret obsession, so he told her about his upbringing. All these thoughts were going through his mind as he wandered through the skirt rack in St. Agatha's second-hand charity shop. "You're a size 12, Jimmy. Why are you looking through the OS?" Mrs. Robinson was staring at him across the rack. "Sorry, Mrs. Robinson, my mind was elsewhere," he answered. "Understandable, Jimmy. There is something wonderful about pretty skirts." Jimmy blushed and did not know what to say. He liked Mrs. Robinson, and more than any of the other older ladies who gave their time working for the charity store, he mostly felt comfortable with her. Mrs. Robinson licked her index finger and reached out and put it to his now burning cheek and made a hiss sound as if putting out a flame. "Jimmy, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. There are lots of men who love wearing pretty dresses, and plenty of other things besides, by the way." Relax, and if you find something you like, do not be afraid to try it on in the little changing room over in the corner. Jimmy was seriously flustered now and hurriedly found a red skirt and took it to the counter where Mrs. Robinson had retreated to. "Oh, Jimmy, that is not you. For starters, it's a size 16 and look at the price. Put that back and let me find you something more suitable." Rummaging expertly through the hundreds of skirts, Mrs. Robinson held out a black pencil skirt and held it up to him. "Size 12. Now let's find you a blouse to match," and led him off to the other side of the shop. She selected a white, almost sheer blouse. "Perfect, now off to the changing room and try them on," she said as gently pushed him in that direction. "Don't worry, if someone else comes in I will tell them the changing room is off limits." Why was he doing exactly as Mrs. Robinson was telling him to do, he asked himself. Suddenly he was pulling the curtain and trying on the skirt and blouse. How did she know that in a skirt he was a size 12 and required a size 14 in a top? He heard the bell as someone entered the store and for what seemed at least 10 minutes waited till he heard it again, meaning someone was leaving. "All clear," Mrs. Robinson was there opening the curtain. "That looks wonderful, Jimmy. You look like a lawyer." "Well, maybe her secretary, and I'm sure a bra underneath that blouse would be just the thing," she said as she went to the underwear rack and came back with a black bra. "Quick off with the blouse." She had it unbuttoned in no time and said, "Turn around, put your arms through the straps, there," she said as she did up the clasps at the back. "Now let me help you into the blouse again. Just look at yourself," she said and turned him towards the mirror. "You look wonderful. Now get changed again, that is unless you want to venture back to your car as you are." "No, well." 2 minutes later Jimmy was paying Mrs. Robinson $7 for the complete outfit. "That was half the amount you were going to pay for that horrible red miniskirt. Oh, and I've thrown in a pair of black panties that will match the bra." "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson," Jimmy mumbled, still blushing. Holding on to his purchase, Mrs. Robinson said, "Jimmy, please call me Helen, and as I said earlier, there is no shame in a man wanting to look pretty." Here she leaned closer to him and lowered her voice. "My late husband Mark loved to dress up. Oh, what fun we had. A lot of his outfits I donated to St. Agatha's, but I still have a wardrobe of his girly clothes at home which I've been reluctant to part with. It's time to let them go, and I would love you to come over and have your pick of what's there. Please say you will." It took him a minute to understand what she was saying, and when it registered he found himself saying yes. "Saturday morning is a good time. I will write down the address and my phone number and expect to hear from you." So after saying, "Thank you, Helen," he left with his purchase and felt sure that he was not going to keep the appointment. He did not know Helen's age. She looked to be in her 50s, but she was still a stunning-looking woman, and he also realized that he found her extremely attractive. He got home to his dingy basement flat and pretended to be a brilliant lawyer's secretary while he watched TV. Saturday came around sooner than expected, and Jimmy still was not sure if he was going to take up Mrs. Robinson's offer, despite saying he would ring her. So far he had not. Then at about 10 o'clock he just went for it. "Hi, Mrs. Robinson, Jimmy here. It's not too early, is it? Have you even had time to?" "Jimmy, so good to hear from you. I thought you had forgotten. I'll expect you over in 30 minutes. You get the buns and I'll have the coffee." "In 30 minutes then." She hung up. He knew she lived in a nice part of town but was not expecting a mansion. Like all the houses in the tree-lined street, it was detached. Detached did not mean that on the street, it was detached in its own massive garden. 2 pillars led to a small gravel driveway leading to steps that then led to a huge porch and a grand front door. Mrs. Robinson was standing in the doorway holding a cup of coffee in both hands. She was wearing tight-fitting jeans, a baggy black t-shirt with the logo 007 printed in white, and a pair of trainers on her feet. She was the picture of relaxation. Jimmy got out of his car and walked up the steps to be greeted with a kiss on the cheek. "Oh, Jimmy, I am so glad you are here. Come in, I've got the coffee all ready. Hope you have brought the buns." She ushered him into the huge hallway. Jimmy held up the paper bag to show he had done as he was told. He was standing right next to Mrs. Robinson, and it seemed that only now had he realized how tall she was. Before he had always thought of her as one of the little old ladies at the charity shop. It was the first time he has ever seen her without glasses, and he could not believe the clarity of her eyes. He had always assumed they were brown, but they were not. They were an astonishing gold color. But what he fixated on was her hair. In the store she had obviously worn a gray wig. Now he saw her hair was cropped like a GI number 1, still gray. It was very masculine. "Stop gaping, Jimmy, let's have a coffee." "What sort of buns did you get?" she said as she led the way down the hall. He closed his mouth and followed her into the vast kitchen, noticing how broad her shoulders were and how nice her ass looked in them tight jeans. She raised her eyes to the ceiling when she saw the sticky currant bun with pink icing that he had brought. She poured him a coffee and made a show of cutting her bun in half and began nibbling. Then began to eat it in earnest. "These taste better than they look." So with sticky fingers and smiles on their faces, Mrs. Robinson reminded Jimmy he was to call her Helen and said she wanted to know all about him, but first she said she had to tell him about her late husband, Mark. She said he was a wonderfully inventive man who had made a whole lot of money out of gaming. Computer gaming, that is, writing programs. "He was funny, kind, and very good to me. He could make me laugh, and I have since discovered that anyone who can make you laugh is worth their weight in gold." But Mark was a transvestite. He loved to dress up. He did not want the world to know and really struggled to tell me. He left it late. We were to marry in 2 weeks. The night he got up the courage to confess this to me, he took about 4 hours beating about the bush before I understood what he was trying to tell me. He spent the 5th hour having sex me wearing my knickers. I loved him too much for something like that to matter. He got a tumor 6 years ago and I miss him every day. Luckily he went quickly. With his, I suppose I could call it his hobby, we did not mix a lot, and to be honest, the past 5 years have been very lonely years, and that is me. But I did discover that in his younger days he frequented St. Agatha's, and that is why I give up my time to be there. Jimmy handed her the paper napkin that came with the sticky bun so she could wipe her eyes. She gave Jimmy her napkin to do the same. The tears turned to laughter at this, and Helen said, "I need something a little bit stronger than coffee," and went to the fridge and got out a bottle of wine, and Jimmy, never too slow, found 2 glasses and a corkscrew. By the time Jimmy had told his story, they had almost finished the 2nd bottle of wine. "But your marriage to Frida was consummated?" Helen asked. "Of course, we did have sex, safe sex," Jimmy answered. "I think we need more sticky buns just to dry our tears with the paper napkins." Helen smiled at him. "Enough of these sad tales, let's go upstairs and I can show you Mark's clothes. Go get the last bottle from the fridge and follow me up to the bedroom with the corkscrew." She laughed at what she had just said. That did not come out right. She wobbled a bit as she stood and picked up the 2 wine glasses and made for the stairs. "Are you sure we need more wine?" Jimmy inquired. "Do what your elders tell you," was Helen's reply. But halfway up the stairs she almost toppled backwards, and luckily Jamie was able to prevent her falling backwards. "I knew there was a reason I brought you home," Helen said. "You did not bring me home, I came here of my own accord," he retorted. "Same thing," she said as she led the way into what was once her and Mark's bedroom. Jimmy spent the next 2 hours in and out of different outfits, different combinations, and even different sets of underwear. Helen helped into each dress, doing up buttons of pulling up zips. Mark had left behind quite a wardrobe, and everything he tried on fit Jimmy perfectly. We will need to get you some shoes. Mark had tiny feet, even my shoes were too big for him. I would say you are a man's size 9, that would mean you would need a women's size 11, big, but we get all sizes donated to the store. I will keep a lookout for some. He was standing in front of the mirror wearing a one-piece girdle straight from the 1950s. Helen was amused because she had the feeling that he had wanted to try it on the moment he spotted it, which was now some time ago. She had continually pushed it to the side, and his efforts to bring it to the top of the pile of underwear lying on the bed were obstructed by her. "Would you like some nylons, Jimmy? You could attach them to the suspenders?" she asked him. Breathlessly, he replied in a husky, "Yes, please." He had been breathless for the past 2 hours. In all his life he had never experienced an afternoon like he was having just then. Sit on the side of the bed. He did, and Helen rolled the nylons up his legs and attached them to the suspenders. He had immediately got hard, and for the umpteenth time that afternoon Helen had grabbed his testicles and squeezed. "Ouch," he said as his penis behaved. He got off the bed and walked about. Why did women wear such cumbersome underwear like girdles in those days? He asked as he made several poses in the mirror. God knows, probably to impress men and make poses in front of them. He heard a fun remark and made a take-me pose for her. He wanted to try a dress on over the girdle and crossed to the wardrobe where he knew there was only one dress left, all the rest were in a heap on the bed. "Was this your wedding gown?" he asked, pointing to the beautiful white garment. "That was to be Mark's wedding dress. We were going to renew our vows and he was going to wear the wedding dress this time," she replied. "It's beautiful." "Yes, it is." He was going to announce to the world that he was a crossdresser at the ceremony, but he took ill and there ended a whole lot of our plans. I thought of putting it on him in the cask, which was open for a day. Not that many came to see him laid out, but decided that as he had always enjoyed his privacy, so decided to forget the idea. She sighed, and continued, "Look down to the bottom of the wardrobe and you will see a tin biscuit box. Fetch it, please." Helen had gone back to sit on the side of the bed, and he joined her and handed her the box. Inside it there was a photo album. This was his collection, his CD photos over the years. This was him in his 20s, all miniskirts and tank tops. His 30s were his panties and bras years. He would prance about the house wearing nothing but panties and bras. In his 40s, all he wanted to wear were full gowns, she said as she indicated at the discarded dresses on the bed. They had spent a good half hour browsing through the album, and Helen was close to tears as she told him that in his early 50s, just before he passes, he had started to wear sissy dresses. She was pointing to a photo of Mark in a little pink frilly sissy dress. "I don't know where this was heading," she said. "There were 2 dresses, a pink one and a powder blue one. I certainly could not take them to St. Agatha's, and I believe they may still be somewhere in the garage if that's your thing." She sniffed and said, "Here, let me help you out of that girdle. You must be getting very uncomfortable. We'll find you something less restricting." She undid the suspenders and rolled off the nylons, then they fought to get him out of the girdle. Now naked, she handed him some panties from the pile and then found a nightie and got him to hold up his arms as she slipped it over his head. I do not know why, but Mark loved the feel of nylon, always nylon panties, slips and nighties. Goodness knows he could have afforded silk underwear, but no, everything had to be nylon. He said he loved the touch of nylon on nylon when he wore a slip or nightie over his panties. "Let's go downstairs, and I even may allow my ever so sexy new girl to make me a coffee, no more wine." The espresso machine was beyond Jimmy's capabilities to work out, so Helen made the coffee. As they were sipping it at the breakfast counter, Jimmy in his nightie and panties had never felt so comfortable with anyone before, not even Frida. "What are all the trophies for?" he asked and pointed to the mantelpiece. "Dancing." "Really?" "Yes, myself and Mark danced in our younger days. Ballroom, rock and roll, tango, everything." Mark always wanted to cross-dress when we danced but never dared. In fact, that red polka dot dress you tried on was the one he wanted to wear. He wanted to be Sandy from Greece. We won a lot of prizes, she finished off. Let's watch a movie, what do you say? There is no way I am going to allow you to drive home. You will be way over the limit. She found an old DVD, and Jimmy was sure a much-watched DVD of Grease and put it on, initially just sitting side by side on the sofa at the beginning but ending up cozied up to each other at the finish. You can sleep in one of the spare rooms, she told him, but sometime in the middle of the night she joined him in bed. He had never made love to a woman while wearing women's clothes, and it was mind-blowing. He did not want this newfound relationship to end. In the morning they did not say much to each other, but Jimmy did not find the silence uncomfortable, it felt natural. Helen made coffee and he made the toast. As he was leaving, Helen pulled him close and kissed him and said, "I'll call." And with that he was off and feeling on top of the world. She might be older, but she's beautiful, he thought as he hummed the tune of Grease.